I remember as a kid, I was just about to leave the store with my mom when I looked over to the left of the cash register towards the rack with all the papers and magazines. I don't remember why I looked over there, but I was probably looking for a WWF magazine, and I wanted to see if Stone Cold or The Rock was on the cover. But quickly glancing around all the stuff that I had no interest in, my eyes transfixed on a black and white headline: Bat Boy found in cave. As a person who for the first 8 years of my life dressed as Dracula for Halloween, I had to know what this was. I asked my mom if we could buy it, and she said no, it's not real. I said, what do you mean? That story is in a newspaper. It has to be real. For close to 3 decades, Weekly World News was a staple of grocery store checkout lines. From 1979 to 2007, Weekly World News captured the attention of supermarket customers with its ridiculous headlines. Some of these headlines include Family Adopts Alien Baby, Space Probe Finds Dinosaurs on Mars, and of course the infamous Elvis Lives. But the only thing weirder than the paper's headlines is their history. And strangely enough, the only reason the tabloid even started was because another tabloid's printing went from black and white to color. Generoso Pope Jr. could be considered the father of the modern supermarket tabloid newspaper. With the aid of a $25,000 payment reportedly borrowed from the mob, Pope purchased the New York Evening Enquirer, which later became the National Enquirer in 1952. The paper specialized in shocking headlines like Starving Mom Eats Own Child, before softening its content to gain retail space at grocery stores in the 1970s. When the National Enquirer's rival tabloid The Star went to a color format, Pope was forced to follow to keep the customers. With the old black and white press just sort of taking up space, Pope decided to put the old printer to work, pumping out a cut-rate tabloid which in its early years wasn't much different than any other celebrity gossip rag. The first issue of Weekly World News was released in October 1979 and sold a respectable 120,000 copies. Over the course of the next several years, however, it became clear that the recycled celebrity news items only appealed to a limited amount of readers. To hold the attention of buyers in the competitive supermarket sales space, Weekly World News would have to find other beats besides the celebrity gossip genre owned by its sister publication, the National Enquirer. By most accounts from people that were there, Weekly World News developed its infamously bizarre voice when Eddie Clance was named managing editor in 1981. Eddie Clance was the one to push the tabloid's new credo: if we get a story about a guy who thinks he's a vampire, we will take him at his word. During the 80s, the Weekly World News wrote stories around the seed of truth. For example, someone got hit by lightning and survived, get an interview, but maybe increase the numbers on the estimated voltage. But as time went on, Weekly World News slipped further and further into the creative embrace of what professional writers refer to as literally just making stuff up. One of the writers of Weekly World News, Joe Berger, told the New York Post, "It wasn't like overnight we just decided to start running fiction. We just added a few facts to a story and got away with it, and it went on from there." Berger, a former White House correspondent, also claimed that about 80% of the stories were clipped from newspapers. We had 3 or 4 clippers who were surrounded by mountains of newspapers. We spent the day looking at newspapers throughout the world, clipping weird stories. Thus, for a significant percentage of its content, the Weekly World News ran strange but somewhat true stories. For example, Giant Mutant Hog Monster Attacking Georgia was based off a true story of a pig that was over 12 feet long and 1,000 pounds. Was it a mutated monster from space, or just a freak of nature? That is for you to decide. But clearly it wasn't a mutated monster from space. There were people who read Weekly World News for its entertainment value, and there were people who read Weekly World News and wanted to believe every word in there. In every story, the Weekly World News claimed that they ultimately gave the reader a chance to believe whatever they wanted to believe. The slight bending of the truth is what gave Weekly World News its charm. So what if the pig isn't mutated? It was a somewhat pig monster freak thing. However, eventually the bending of the truth completely snapped. Before long, Weekly World News submerged itself completely in the fantastic. For the most part, Weekly World News knew their audience, and they knew that they didn't care if there was necessarily a grain of truth and aliens are in the White House. They wanted to be entertained. Originally, they would fight that their stories were real and try to work people into thinking it could be somewhat possible. But even they, in 2004, had to set a disclaimer on all their tabloids, stating that the reader should suspend disbelief for the sake of enjoyment. Before Welcome to Night Vale and other similar podcasts, Weekly World News was there for commuters' fix of all things strange. In the 2000s, Sun tabloid, Weekly World News' main rival, moved more towards articles on health and miracle cures, leaving Weekly World News alone in its niche of supernatural news stories, such as the sightings of Tupac or Bigfoot. As the more fantastical stories began to catch on, the serialization of characters began. For example, one writer for Weekly World News wrote a story about an obscure sea creature in one of the Great Lakes. He then did a story that the creature set sail across the Atlantic on a mission to go toe-to-toe with the Loch Ness Monster. One article, the monster is on its journey, the next, the monster gets there, and then it turns out that he went there to mate with Loch Ness Monster. In experimenting with different stories and characters, from alien abductions to Elvis sightings, Weekly World News quickly learned which types of tales on the cover would move copies. However, it was more fitting that the most popular character in the Weekly World News history was created by accident. Dick Copel was a writer and editor for Weekly World News, and he was asked to write and create a story about a space alien baby. Copel was also an artist and decided to sketch out what this alien baby could look like. Copel drew a space alien with big ears, big eyes, and a scary look. Another writer walked by and said, "We have done too many alien stories. Maybe he's not a space alien. Maybe he's half human, half bat." And there a legend was born. On June 23, 1992, Weekly World News put out their tabloid with the headline, "Bat Child Found in West Virginia Cave," introducing the world to a 2-foot-tall, 19-pound hybrid beast child. The first posting of Bat Boy allegedly sold 975,000 copies, a great seller for Weekly World News. Culpa knew this character had legs and decided to make Bat Boy's story an episodic part of Weekly World News. Eventually, Bat Boy became somewhat of an anti-hero, and they started to write that Bat Boy was highly sought after by the FBI. Bat Boy became so popular, the FBI actually called Weekly World News to retract the story because they were getting calls from people to leave Bat Boy alone. The adventures of Bat Boy ran the gamut of absurdity. In World War II, different fictional characters like Superman and Donald Duck were recruited for the war effort, so Weekly World News did one where Bat Boy was recruited for the Marines. They got to the extreme that Bat Boy was even running for president, but the original writers thought that got too absurd, saying it was, quote, crap. Even with all the absurd premises, Bat Boy was easily the most popular creation of Weekly World News. The character of Bat Boy became a pop culture figure in the 90s, and the story was even turned into an off-Broadway show, Bat Boy the Musical. While Weekly World News earned a place in popular culture in the late 1980s with fictional headlines like Bat Boy, their biggest controversy came when they showed the complete truth. In February 1989, the paper published 3 photos depicting serial killer Ted Bundy's corpse after his execution. It was a rare departure into real-life morbidity. The person who had taken the pictures had offered them to the National Enquirer, but the Enquirer decided it was too harsh, so Weekly World News bought them instead. A lot of writers at World News did not agree with the decision. Some claimed that some of their biggest fans were kids, and didn't need to see that. Others said there was no reason to post it when there was no story or controversy, saying as most people thought Bundy was evil and wanted him dead. Managing editor Eddie Clance defended his decision to run the photos, claiming that he hoped that such images would deter other murderers. Despite the controversy, the magazine sold a record 1.5 million copies, outpacing the legendary Elvis is Alive headline. The Bundy story wasn't the only major milestone of 1989 for the paper. With Generoso Pope Jr. having passed away in 1988, his largest assets, the National Enquirer and Weekly World News, were sold off for a total of $413 million to Boston Ventures and McFadden Holdings, which was later renamed American Media. The paper was moved a second time in 1999 when Evercore Capital Partners purchased American Media. Eddie Clance left the following year. Clance was the man who gave World News its unique voice, and when he left, many members of the staff believed it was the end of the paper. With Clance's departure, the rise of the internet, and the presence of The Onion, world news began to get squeezed out of pop culture. The end, or at least a version of it, came for Weekly World News in 2007, when American media made the August 27th issue its last. In 2008, the brand was acquired by investors including Neil McGuinness, a former National Lampoon executive who created Batboy LLC to buy the company. While there has been some internal shuffling at the top, Weekly World News is still active online, posting stories just as ridiculous as those from the past. They even have plans for other ideas with the brand, like exploring movie ideas, and even an office-style sitcom about the original paper. While both readers and journalists struggle with the concept of fake news, Weekly World News was the original, but they did it for fun rather than misinformation. Even though Weekly World News is not part of the cultural zeitgeist anymore, there is no doubting the paper's legacy. It's undeniable that its legacy transcends the boundaries of traditional journalism. From Batboy to Elvis sightings, this sensational tabloid dared us to question the absurd, find humor in the outlandish, and perhaps, just for a moment, believe in the extraordinary. As we navigate the ever-evolving landscape of media, let's not forget the strange, the bizarre, and the downright fantastical stories that once graced the pages of this unconventional publication. In doing so, we not only honor the legacy of the Weekly World News, but also recognize the enduring human fascination with the weird.